And we are really honored to have you here today and accept this invitation. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure. It's a beautiful university. Well, I started my career as a doctor in medicine, and I was planning to be a surgeon like my father. But I decided to take a year off in between my first year of surgery and the beginning of my neurosurgical residency. I went back to New York City to study music. I grew up playing the cello. But to support my music, I had to make a living. I could work part-time medical jobs. And the first job I was able to get was for the prison for New York City. So I would my job was primarily staying up all night doing medical exams. But it exposed me to patterns of social injustice because nearly everybody coming into the prison was poor. Nearly everybody had experienced being abused in one way or another. And nearly all of them were minorities, either African American or Latin American. And that made me change my career because I decided I wanted to be a doctor at the systems level. There was one other important job that was critical in the formation of this new direction. It was as if it was on the other side of the moon. It was also in New York City, but this time the job was to examine presidents and senior vice presidents of major companies. And maybe a half of them, 50%, were not living very healthy. And that experience maybe got me interested in leadership per se. There were no graduate programs in the United States to study leadership back then in 1980. So I had to design my own program. First, I decided to finish my medical training in psychiatry because I thought if I came to understand people better, it would help me understand the challenges of leadership. And then I did a master's degree at the school where I now teach, the Kennedy School of Government. Those were the steps in that transition. The answer to that question is still incomplete. There's a lot of research that needs to be done to identify the diagnostic indicators. Many challenges come bundled, and so a primary task of leadership is to begin to distinguish which is which. I began to see how different it was, the mode of problem solving, when you're trying to build somebody's own capacity versus simply fixing the problem for them. I think we have to train people in organizations, nonprofits, business, and very much in politics, to know how to say to the people, there are many problems that we face that the government can solve for you. And we're going to work very hard to effectively and efficiently tackle those problems. But there are many problems that we face that also require collective responsibility, where I cannot take the problem off your chest. And in fact, that's the nature of a democracy, that we share responsibility for our problems rather than simply expect the government to solve every problem for you. So the metaphor that I like to discuss one of the tasks of leadership is a pressure cooker. Now, when you're making a stew, cooking a stew in a pressure cooker, the carrots and the lentils, they don't want to learn from each other. But under pressure, they begin to share, flavors. So if you run a very good problem-solving process with a diverse group and bring them together and hold them in the conversation, that's the phase one of the process. Phase two of the process is then getting them to consult to one another on the leadership headache that they've now given each other. Because when each goes back home to their people, the carrot goes home to the carrots. All the carrots say, how come you smell like a lentil? This phase two is where they consult to each other on the strategy of how will we now mobilize the adaptive change in the periphery, back home in the neighborhoods, in the communities. They may have to say, some of your people need to talk to some of my people, and they have to create, collaborations out in the periphery. Strategies of mobilizing adaptive work back home into each of their own neighborhoods. Well, it takes a spirit of adventure, courage, and it takes caring for the long-term adaptability of your community. because if you don't undergo adaptive change, you risk suffering even greater losses. But it also takes a creative spirit. And there are a lot of creative people, people who want the adventure of staring into a difficult challenge and coming up with new possibilities. Now, most new possibilities fail. But when Windows first started, it was competing with Apple for coming up with an operating system that had a graphical interface. They worked very hard, their engineers, to compete with Steve Jobs at Apple. And finally, they created Windows 1.0. Big investment, a lot of money. And then the big dramatic launch. And it flopped. They picked themselves up from the floor. They stayed. They didn't get discouraged. And they made a revision, version 1.1. And it failed. And they went through all these revisions. And finally they got to version 3.0 and it succeeded.
Oh, finally.
And then they began to make the money back that they had lost in all those investments. Now, it took a lot of faith that somehow we will get there. But most innovations require a lot of experiments that fail. It's just the nature of coming up with a good innovation that it's not so easy to get it right the first time. The high-tech industry gives us a very good set of examples of the innovative process that requires staying in the game and not losing faith of trial and error. The public still expects the software to work perfectly the first time. But your watch, your Apple Watch, updates its software over and over again.
Yes.
And they've sold you on buying a prototype because they've established a new contract with you. They will stay by you. You will trust them to keep updating the software, and you're willing to buy a product that's imperfect. In politics, we need to define a new social contract where citizens stay in the game of changes in government that are innovative, but don't get it perfect from the beginning. That's what it means to be engaged in ongoing adaptive work. And that requires a citizenry that's not looking for permanent stability, but is willing to be part of the ongoing effort of building a better community.